Stop explaining yourself. It doesn't make you clearer, it makes you smaller. Every extra word is a quiet admission that your authority needs approval. And whether you realize it or not, people can feel that shift instantly. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you try to be understood, the less you're respected. Strange, isn't it? We've been taught that clarity builds trust, that openness earns respect, but look closely at the world around you. The people who hold real influence don't rush to justify themselves. They don't scramble to correct every misunderstanding. They don't plead to be seen in the right light. They let silence do something far more dangerous. It makes others think. And once people start thinking, they start filling in the gaps with assumptions, with projections, often with something far more powerful than reality itself. So let me ask you something. Why is it that the moment you feel misunderstood, your instinct is to explain? That impulse, that urgency, is where power quietly slips through your fingers. Centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a pattern most people still fail to see. Not in theory, but in raw human behavior. People don't reward truth. They respond to perception, and perception is shaped far less by what you say than by what you refuse to say. Because the moment you start explaining, the dynamic changes. You're no longer the authority. You're the one being evaluated, measured, judged. And here's the part no one tells you: explanations don't close doubts. They create them. Every added detail is another angle to question, another thread to pull, another crack in the image you're trying to protect. Silence, on the other hand, does the opposite. It unsettles. It disrupts. It forces the other person to sit with uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, your presence expands. In today's world, this matters more than ever. Social media, workplaces, relationships, everyone feels entitled to your reasons, your thoughts, your side of the story. And the more you give, the more they expect, until there's nothing left of you that isn't being explained. We call it honesty, but in reality, it's a slow form of surrender. This isn't about arrogance. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about control. Because something shifts the moment you stop over-explaining. People listen more carefully. They hesitate more. They choose their words with precision. Not because you said more, but because you didn't. In this video, you'll see exactly how silence, restraint, and controlled ambiguity reshape the way people perceive you. Quietly, but decisively. No aggression, no noise, no need to demand respect. By the end, you won't feel the urge to explain yourself the same way again. Because once you see how power actually moves, you stop giving it away for free. The first thing you need to understand is this: silence is not the absence of a response. Silence is a response. In certain situations, it's the most powerful one there is, because it's the only one the other person can't attack, twist, or use against you later. You will never regret a word you didn't say. You'll regret hundreds you said too quickly. Think about how an attack actually works. Someone questions you, accuses you, tests you in a social situation. What does that attack need to survive? It needs your reaction. It needs you to step into the frame that was built for you. Because the moment you react immediately when you defend, when you explain, you're implicitly accepting that the accusation is legitimate enough to deserve an answer. You're giving the other person the role of judge, and you're voluntarily stepping into the role of defendant. And once you're inside that improvised courtroom, you've already lost the authority battle, even if you win the argument. There was a man I once knew in a professional environment. I'll call him Ethan. Ethan was intelligent, articulate, capable, but he had a serious problem. He couldn't stand being misunderstood. Any question, any sideways glance, any comment that hinted at doubt about his competence, and Ethan would go into full defense mode. He'd start explaining, building cases, referencing examples, listing evidence as if every situation were a hearing. And the more he talked, the more people around him felt something no one dared to name: insecurity. Not necessarily his, but a need for approval that leaked through every extra word he spoke. The outcome was predictable. Ethan wasn't respected in proportion to his ability. He was tolerated. People saw him as manageable, predictable, easy to destabilize. All it took was the right question, in the right tone, and he would put himself on trial. Now put another man in the same situation. Same question, same social pressure, same dynamic. The difference is that when confronted, he does something most people can't. He pauses. He lets the silence exist. He looks at the other person with an expression that gives away absolutely nothing. No anger, no discomfort, no forced humor, just calm presence. And then, if he chooses to respond, he says the minimum with maximum precision. Or he says nothing at all and closes the matter with his posture alone. What happens to the attacker in that moment is psychologically interesting. The absence of reaction breaks the script. They were primed for a specific response: defense, justification, emotion. When none of that comes, they enter a state of uncertainty. Did I go too far? Does he know something I don't? Was this even worth it? That uncertainty is the beginning of retreat, and retreat is the beginning of respect. There's an important distinction here, because otherwise this turns into an excuse for freezing out of fear. Strategic silence is not paralysis. It's not passivity disguised as control. It's a deliberate choice based on reading the situation. You're not quiet because you don't know what to say. You're quiet because you've already calculated that anything you say right now will cost more than silence. It's the difference between a man who's frozen and a man who's hunting. From the outside, they look the same. On the inside, the state is completely different. And that distinction shows up in the body. The silence of someone who's afraid creates tension in the shoulders, shallow breathing, darting eyes. The silence of someone in control is different. Open posture, steady breathing, direct eye contact without aggression or challenge, just presence. That body communicates before any words. I'm here, I'm not threatened, and you can keep talking. I'm registering everything. There's another dimension of silence most people completely ignore: what it does to time. When you respond quickly, you're operating on the other person's timing. You're being pulled into a rhythm imposed on you. When you pause before answering 2 seconds, 5 seconds, you break that rhythm. You reset the pace of the interaction to your own. And at a level the other person is almost never consciously aware of, that shift changes who's in control. Men who understand this stop seeing silence as a lack of power and start seeing it as the most precise instrument of power there is. You can't quote me on something I didn't say. You can't twist the meaning of what was never stated. You can't build a case against a position that was never made explicit. Silence is the only ground where you cannot be attacked. And here's the paradox very few men truly accept. The less you speak under pressure, the more people listen when you finally do, because you've established a pattern. Your words are scarce, and what is scarce carries weight. Not because you performed, but because you trained the people around you to understand that when you speak, it's because there's something worth hearing. And over time, that builds a kind of authority no speech can buy. There's something most men do that seems completely harmless, but in practice, it's one of the biggest giveaways of power: excessive clarity. It sounds like a contradiction, because we've been taught that good communication means being clear, direct, transparent, and in many contexts, that's true. But there's a line, and on the other side of it, too much clarity becomes too much vulnerability. When you explain everything, every intention, every plan, every reason behind every move, you're offering the world something very valuable: fixed points. And fixed points are targets. Criticism finds where to land. Sabotage finds what to anticipate. Judgment finds what to measure. And suddenly, you're not just communicating, you're being processed, evaluated, framed inside a structure you handed over yourself. Controlled ambiguity works in the opposite direction. It's not confusion, not inconsistency, not an escape from responsibility. It's the deliberate refusal to give more information than necessary to those who haven't earned access to it. It's understanding that not everything you know needs to be said, and not everyone who asks is entitled to a complete answer. Think about how this plays out in everyday interactions. Someone asks what you're building, what you're planning, where you're headed. The automatic response, especially if you're excited, is to go into detail. You lay out the plan, the steps, the expected results, the obstacles you're anticipating. And while you're doing that, something happens that you don't notice because you're busy talking. The other person is calibrating, mapping what can be questioned, what can be compared, where doubts can be introduced that will make you hesitate or force you to justify yourself again. The man who operates with controlled ambiguity responds differently, not with arrogance, not with obvious evasion, but with calculated brevity. I'm working on a few things. That's it, no detail, no invitation for interrogation, no material for judgment, and the effect is curious. People become more interested, not less. The absence of information makes the brain work. And a brain working to figure you out is, by definition, more focused on you than any speech you could give. There's a subtle power shift that happens when you stop over-explaining your choices. It starts as a strange feeling in the other person, a slight cognitive imbalance. They're used to having access, to knowing what drives the people around them, to having enough information to place you on their social map. When you remove that access, even partially, they have to do the work you used to do for them, infer. And inference, most of the time, works in your favor, because people tend to project more competence, more strategy, more depth onto those they can't fully read. Here's an example that might feel familiar. Have you ever met someone who, no matter what was happening around them, simply didn't react the way you expected? Not in a dramatic way, not trying to be mysterious, just not giving everything away. When asked, they answered little. When pressured, they became calmer. When things went well, they didn't over-celebrate. When things went wrong, they didn't signal desperation. And you found yourself thinking about that person more than others who told you everything about themselves. Why? Because the human mind chases what's incomplete, not what's fully revealed. It fixates on what's partially hidden, and without realizing it, you were experiencing the effect of someone who controls their own narrative. Now, there's a misconception that needs to be cleared up. Otherwise, this turns into an excuse for empty evasiveness. Ambiguity that works has a real foundation. It's not performative mystery, not dodging questions with nothing behind it. It's having substance and revealing it strategically. Because when someone finally gets access to a piece of who you are, that piece carries weight. It's consistent. It reinforces the perception of depth. And depth, in terms of social authority, is one of the most valuable currencies there is. The mistake most people make is confusing revelation with connection. They think the more they share about themselves, the more people connect with them. That's true on a shallow, short-term level. People feel close when you open up. But that kind of closeness is fragile, because it was bought with information not built on substance. And when the information runs out, curiosity goes with it. You become a book that's already been read too familiar to be intriguing. The man who understands ambiguity doesn't perform mystery. He simply stops narrating his life in real time to people who haven't earned the right to watch. He understands that every detail you voluntarily give reduces the space the other person's imagination would otherwise fill. And imagination fills that space in ways your own narrative never could. So you stop announcing plans before execution. Results speak after they exist, not promises before they materialize. You stop explaining your absences, your silence, your changes in direction. Not because you're hiding weakness, but because you understand that not explaining isn't omission, it's control. It's the difference between being read and being felt. And a man who is felt without being fully read, that man stays in people's minds long after he's left the room. There's an illusion almost every man carries, the idea that showing everything you feel is a sign of strength, authenticity, courage. There's a grain of truth in it, which makes the illusion more dangerous. It mixes a real virtue with a vulnerability mechanism you don't realize you're activating. The problem isn't feeling. The problem is broadcasting everything you feel to everyone around you, in real time, no filter, no strategy, no awareness of what each emotional signal reveals about where you can be pressured, and how. Every time your tone shifts when a certain topic comes up, every time your posture closes when something bothers you, every time your laugh tightens when you're uncomfortable, you're handing out a map. And maps get used, not just by malicious people, by anyone who instinctively senses a pressure point and, consciously or not, presses on it. That's basic human behavior. You do it too with others without noticing. The question is, are you the one giving the map or the one reading it? I've seen this play out almost clinically in a negotiation between two men. They both wanted the same outcome. Both had reasonable arguments, but one of them, every time he was challenged, leaked microsignals. A half-second hesitation before answering, a slight rise in his voice when he felt he was losing ground. a tendency to speak faster when he was unsure. The other man, who probably couldn't have explained what he was doing, kept calibrating pressure exactly at those points. In the end, the outcome had less to do with the strength of the arguments, and more to do with who held their composure to the finish. Emotional control is not numbness. You're not trying to become a statue, or pretend nothing affects you, or build indifference into your identity. What you're developing is a layer between what you feel and what you show, a high-precision filter that lets through what serves you and holds back what would be exploited. In practice, that looks very specific. When someone brings you bad news, your first response isn't raw emotion. It's silence, or a question, or a short sentence. You process internally before responding externally. That isn't coldness, it's efficiency. It's refusing to be an automatic response system that any stimulus can trigger. It means that when you're under pressure, especially in public, the quality of your voice doesn't change. It doesn't speed up, doesn't rise, doesn't crack. It stays in the same register. Because a voice that shifts under pressure is the clearest signal there is that the ground is unstable. And when the ground is unstable, predators move in. There's an archetype that shows up in every social group, every professional setting, every circle of men, the one the room's temperature can't bend. Everyone else may be under pressure, emotions running high, and he stays in the same register, not because he's detached, but because he's trained the difference between being affected and showing that he's affected. And that man, without fail, becomes the reference point the environment uses to gauge the seriousness of the situation. If he hasn't moved, maybe it's not that serious. If he has, then it truly is. That's what emotional control builds over time. Calibration authority. People start using your reaction as the thermometer of the room. And when you're the thermometer, you are, by definition, above the climate everyone else is reacting to. Now for the part most people resist. This requires you to tolerate being misunderstood without correcting it in the moment. It requires letting some silences be filled with assumptions that aren't necessarily in your favor. It requires resisting the urge to justify yourself exactly when that urge is strongest, right when the accusation hits. And this is where most men break, because the discomfort of being misunderstood is real. It's visceral. It triggers something primitive that wants to correct the record, make things fair, restore the narrative. But here's what that impulse misses. Correcting in the heat of accusation rarely changes perception. It may change the argument, but the perception of authority, or the lack of it, was already registered the moment you reacted defensively. The battle you think you're winning with words was already lost in body language. The man who understands this stops fighting on that field. He doesn't ignore injustice. He chooses the timing and the form of his response, not the timing someone else forced on him. Sometimes that means answering hours later, in private, with surgical precision. Sometimes it means not answering at all, because sustained silence says more than any reply. Sometimes it's a look, a pause, two words that close the matter without opening debate. That level of control doesn't come from technique. It comes from internal clarity, knowing who you are and what doesn't need defending. Because when you know the value of what you've built, what you represent, what you've chosen to be, someone else's accusation stops being a threat and becomes just noise. And you don't explain noise. You let it pass, and you keep moving. Most men announce what they're going to do long before they do it. There's an honest psychological reason for that. Announcing creates early validation. When you share a plan and people respond positively, your brain releases the same kind of neurochemical you'd get from actually executing it. It's reward without the work, and that's exactly why it's a trap. Because beyond draining your drive to follow through, announcing does something even more costly. It exposes your intention before it has any protection. A plan that doesn't exist yet is just an idea floating in a social field where anyone can question it, doubt it, laugh at it, or undermine it. And even if no one actively does any of that, simply hearing objections, hesitation, or lack of enthusiasm is enough for part of you to internalize doubt where there was once momentum. Men who understand power move differently. They don't announce, they execute. And when they present results, they present finished facts with a unique advantage. They don't need defending. No one debates what already exists with the same intensity. They debate what might happen. The result is real. It reframes the conversation before it even begins. There's a pattern you've probably noticed without naming it. The men who talk the most about what they're going to do tend to be the ones who do the least. Not because they're dishonest, but because talking has replaced action in their reward system. Every time they share a plan and get a positive reaction, their need to execute drops a little. The brain reads it as good enough, and the loop closes without anything being built. The man who stays quiet doesn't have that shortcut. The only way to get what he needs is to do the work, and that position, which looks lonelier, more austere, is actually more powerful. Because when he shows up with results, there's no prior expectation to disappoint, no promise to be used against him, no narrative to manage. There's only what exists concrete, undeniable. There's another angle to silent action that goes against what most people learn about networking, presence, and reputation building. It's about narrative control. When you act without announcing, you don't lose control of the story. You gain the kind that matters most, retrospective control. The narrative that forms around a finished result is built on facts, not promises. And facts are far harder to distort than intentions. When you explain beforehand, the narrative becomes co-authored. You've handed others the raw material. They get to interpret. When you act first and reveal later, the story starts from the reality you created. Others can comment, question details, but the foundation is yours. This principle scales over time. The men we respect most are rarely the ones who told us what they were going to do. They're the ones who show up with what they've done, who stack results quietly, who build a track record that speaks before they do. There's friction here that needs to be faced. This path is lonely at first, without the validation that comes from announcing plans, without the comfort of knowing people are rooting for you, without the sense of belonging to a shared story before results exist. You're left with yourself and the work doesn't validate you. It just exists while you're inside it. A lot of men can't handle that silence. Not the external silence, the internal one. The not knowing if you're on the right path. The lack of constant feedback. Operating in what feels like an echo chamber where the only voice is your own. And that's exactly where character is revealed, not in the moment of achievement, but in the quiet stretch of process no one sees. Controlling the narrative also means knowing what to do when things don't go as planned. And here's where the discipline of not announcing pays an extra dividend. When something shifts, when a bet doesn't land, there's no audience to explain it to, no promise to unwind publicly, no story to rewrite to protect your image. You just adjust, in private, no ceremony, and keep moving. That's radically different from the man who told everyone his plan, built expectation around it, tied part of his public identity to the outcome. When the plan changes, he has to manage perception alongside reality, and that image management drains energy that should go into the next move. There's a simple discipline here, easy to understand, hard to live. When you feel the urge to talk about something before you've done it, wait. Do it first, talk later, if it even needs to be said. Then watch how the quality of the conversation changes. No speculative questioning, no preemptive objections, no outside emotional investment in something that's still yours. Just the reality you created, and reality doesn't need defending. We've reached the point where everything comes together in one question. Who do you choose to be when no one is asking you to explain, justify, or perform? Because everything we've covered, strategic silence, controlled ambiguity, emotional control, action without announcement, are all expressions of something deeper. The decision to not need permission to exist with authority. Most men live in constant search of external alignment. They adjust their tone depending on who's in the room. Adjust their opinions based on what they think will be well received. Adjust their presence based on how much resistance they feel. And that constant adjustment, which looks like social flexibility, like interpersonal intelligence, is actually a form of self-erasure, slow, gradual, and entirely self-inflicted. The man who builds an unshakable presence isn't rigid, he's consistent. There's a massive difference. Rigid means you can't adapt. Consistent means you adapt in form without changing in essence. You can change the language you use in a conversation without changing who you are in it. You can shift your tone without giving up your center. And that center, when it's truly built, when it's not performance but the product of real decisions about what you will and won't tolerate, what matters and what doesn't, emits something people feel before they can explain it. They can't quite name it, but they sense it. It's the difference between a man who occupies space and a man who is the space. One is present. The other is a reference point. There's a story that captures this better than any abstract idea. There was a man in a group I used to observe. He wasn't the most charismatic, not the most talkative, definitely not the one who explained himself the most. But there was something about him. Whenever conflict came up, people instinctively looked at him, not for solutions, but to gauge the weight of the situation. One day, someone tried to destabilize him in public. A sharp comment designed to provoke, to force him to defend himself in front of everyone. The group went quiet, waiting. He turned, looked at the person, stayed silent for maybe 4 seconds, which in a moment like that feels much longer, and simply said, "Interesting." Then went back to what he was doing. The other guy laughed nervously, tried to push again. No reaction. The exchange died in under 30 seconds. And what lingered wasn't tension, it was clarity. Everyone in the room understood something no one had to say. This man cannot be moved by this kind of thing. And that realization changed how everyone positioned themselves around him. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't cruelty. It was total control over what he allowed to reach his surface, and repeated over time in big moments, and small, that builds a kind of authority no speech about respect or power can buy. The hardest part to accept is that this process is lonely before it's recognized. When you stop explaining yourself, people notice. They'll ask what's wrong, they'll say you've changed. They'll try to pull you back into the old pattern where you provided access, explanations, the comfort of being fully readable. And when you don't give in, when you simply continue as you've chosen to be, there will be friction. That friction is the signal that it's working. It's not a problem. It's proof you've left the place where you were easy to manage. And men who can't be easily managed inevitably reshape the dynamics around them. The ones who stay are the ones who respect what you've become. The ones who leave were only there because access was easy. Without that separation, you never really know who's around you for real value and who's there out of convenience. Now, what you do with all of this comes down to a simple decision. Will you continue tomorrow exactly as you were yesterday, or will you apply something you've processed here? Not everything at once, not as performance, not by announcing to anyone that you've changed. Just one thing. Maybe it's holding back an explanation you were about to give in a moment where it wasn't necessary. Maybe it's letting silence exist in a conversation instead of rushing to fill it. Maybe it's doing the work before talking about it. Small, consistent, unseen. If you made it this far, you weren't just watching, you were recognizing something. And that recognition, that feeling, that part of what was said here describes something you've lived but never had the words for. That's the beginning of real change. Now I want to hear from you. Not as a survey, not for engagement's sake, because it matters. Which part of this hit you in a way you didn't expect? You don't need to write a book. One word, one sentence, what stayed with you? Because the stories people leave in the comments are where I see what truly resonates, and that's what shapes the next videos. And if you have a story, a real moment where you lost ground by over-explaining, or held your position by staying silent, share it here. This channel is built on real experiences, not isolated theory. What you've lived matters, and other men going through the same thing need to hear they're not alone. If this video found you through the algorithm or a recommendation, maybe it's time to stay. Not out of obligation, because what's being built here is different from what you'll find anywhere else. No stage performance motivation, no packaged formulas, just raw power dynamics the way they actually work. If that's what you're looking for, the subscribe button is there. And when you click it, you won't get more of the same. You'll get what most people don't have the stomach to hear. See you in the next one.